Welcome to the Enlightened Times podcast. I've got a very, very special guest today on the show, and his name's Richard Short, and he's a sacred knowledge researcher, hidden history, and all things conspiratorial. Welcome to the show, Richard.
How you doing, Mark? Thanks for having me on, buddy.
It's a pleasure. I've been waiting to get you on for quite a while, and we've got round to it now. And today, hopefully, we can hear a bit about your journey and where this has led you and to the present time, and how this has all unfolded in your life as well. So
yeah, in regards to the journey part, it's not important for people to know. Where we are today in the world and what's happening is important, so we'll definitely be covering that.
Yeah.
But in regards to the journey itself, I think that's quite an important point to just point out that many years ago, I actually ended up bumping into you, didn't I, Mark? And I was introduced to you because someone said to me, we were both working in a joinery factory, and a lad called Anthony came up to me and said, you want to move upstairs where I am? There's a couple of guys that are really into their stuff and conspiracy theorists, as they would call us, as the general populace and population would call us.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I was like, yeah, let's go and meet them. I remember coming up and meeting you, and I thought of myself as a bit of, deep into subjects and whatnot at the time. And then you and Simon turned around and said to me, you believe man landed on the moon? I suppose it was a bit of a test. And I was like, of course they did. And then he was like, here, go home and watch this. And he gave me the 2 discs. It was a funny thing happened on the way to the moon, and astronauts gone wild. And I came back in after that on my hands and knees. I was like, show me more. And we went out doing a few things like truth juice meetings and stuff like that. Yeah. But my journey before that was kind of more into the religion sides, to try and break the back of religions, of why there's so many religions on the planet, why there's so many alleged gods to all these religions. Yeah. And still to this day, there's 4,000 religions and 2,000 gods available to the earth. If you're an atheist and you want to become one, there's such a massive amount of options. Yeah. And then I actually broke it down to understand that no matter which one you looked at, you wouldn't have a whole life long enough to study and know everything about it. That's the issue that we had. So my journey started off doing all that. Then, of course, when I met you, kind of things opened up, and that's when the horizon became a lot wider. Where I was like, wow, the world really isn't what we thought. They've lied about this. Then we was doing the old 9/11 Twin Towers stuff. And one thing led to another. And it's just like, wow, that's when my journey really took off, when meeting yourself and Simon. And we was all working together, which, by the way, still to this day, was one of my favourite jobs I ever had, working with you guys.
All right.
I did, honestly. I used to love it every day, coming into work, putting podcasts on, listening to different things, And I got to meet John Hanson back then, who's obviously 30-year police officer, sergeant and whatnot. I think he may have even been CID for a bit as well, because of a UFO incident that I witnessed. And funnily enough, he came onto a podcast to discuss something that had happened within the local areas, how 2,000 phone calls were reported. And I was like, that's the same thing I seen. So I ended up going around and being interviewed by John. And it's been a long, amazing journey. But I think really the important bit that we need to get to is what happened when 2020 came along. And I suppose really, that's my time to fire back up again. And people like ourselves, it was almost like you say, it's the Great Awakening. Also at the exact same time as the Great Reset, the Great Deception upon the world. And, we all came out of the woodwork again. And then we realised we're not so alone anymore, because there are millions of us worldwide that are critical thinkers, awakened and aware. And we're not walking around with a blindfold. And most of us certainly didn't walk around with a mask at that time.
Yeah.
So we stood out like a sore thumb to each other, and that's where people started to connect. And that's why the world now is in a place where, there are millions of us worldwide. Even though there's billions of people, most of them are walking around, as we would say, sleepwalking or switched off, unaware of the world being what it is, and actually thinking the world that they, or most people, come from, where it is just 9 till 5, you go to work, come home. They might have a hobby like watching football, and these sort of lifestyles are the illusion to keep people from the big depth of what's really happening on this planet, which is horrific, but also very interesting to know some of these things that are happening on an everyday basis. Some of the things that are happening are horrifically scary, but ultimately the sacred knowledge part and the hidden histories, for people to understand where we are today, they're born in a world where we believe that we are the most advanced civilization of its time and
Yeah.
technology. And it's like, wow, what a lie. We've actually devolved over thousands
Yeah.
of years. And we're at a stage now where we can't replicate some of the actual techniques that buildings have been built with over the centuries before us. And then in theory, you know, that's the part of the illusion. People think that we're at the most advanced time of humanity. We're not. We're at the worst possible time the world could ever be in. And humanity is at its lowest in terms of
Yeah.
vibration. And as a collective, what we should be and could be, we're nowhere near it. So we
Yeah.
are in the worst, darkest times the world has ever seen. So
Absolutely. Yeah. And I do know in your journey anyway, so I've been following on and off. He does lead you onto a bit of a spiritual path. So that's something we can touch on, you know, at some point. But for you, like you say, this from when we worked together, it's almost like there was a coming back together, wasn't there? Because I bumped into you at a protest.
yeah, that's it,
And
Birmingham.
yeah. So that was a synchronicity, the way that happened, you know,
Yeah,
because we'd all
meant to
gone
be.
our
Yeah,
separate ways for about 7 or 8 years, whatever it was.
yeah. I hadn't seen you for a long, long time,
Yeah.
and yeah.
Yeah. So that was interesting. And obviously, knowing you was well, I say well prepared. I think when 2020 happened, that you perhaps knew inside it was time to step up. So what happened there then? Because obviously we want to get on to 2020 as well. So and you
Yeah.
know, how
Well,
that all come about.
for me, obviously, you know, going back to 2019,
Yeah.
because before that, I've always lived a life of a bit of a fighter as well. So, you
Yeah.
know, I did my MMA and things like that, and I was a bit of a in my area, a bit of a street fighter. You know, I'd go out and
Yeah.
hit the towns and whatnot, and I never ever hurt anyone for no reason. I
Yeah.
never fight with anyone for no reason. I looked for the bullies. I looked for the ones that were looking for trouble. That's where
Yeah.
my mom would be at, and that's it, to protect people.
Yeah.
But that said, 2019, I decided to stop going out completely, and I had my family at home. I was doing my animal rescue, you know, so there's some you may have seen some of the
Yes,
videos
I
I've done
did.
with that stuff, and
Yeah.
that was my lifestyle. And I stayed out of the towns, I stayed out of all that, you know, my normal way of life,
Yeah.
and tried to be different again. And started doing back into my deep research, anthroposophy, anthropology. I was going into in 2019. I was meant to get access to the London Museum to go into
Right.
the Middle Eastern side, so I could do more depth on the Sumerian cuneiform tablets and things like that. And then towards the back end of 2019 was when obviously this thing popped up
Yeah.
called COVID
Yeah.
in China and whatnot. And I was watching a few things, but at the exact same time as that happened, or just before it, millions of people were taken to the streets in China protesting against their, well, communist governments
Yeah.
and the tyrannical things that are happening out in China.
Yeah.
So it's quite coincidental. When COVID was first mentioned about people dropping, I thought something's not right there. They're doing that to shut down these protesters because millions were taken to the streets and the police forces and the armies couldn't control it.
Right.
So that was at the back end of 2019.
Mm.
And again, we weren't being shown that in our normal mainstream medias, but it was there available on YouTube and certain channels. Yeah. And that really made me think, well, something's not right there. They've tied something in with shutting down these protests to make it illegal for them to be on the streets, if you want, at the time.
Yeah.
In order for them to grip control. But then, of course, our mainstream media started discussing this thing that happened in China.
Yeah.
And showing us things about people dropping in the streets. And I thought, looks like a movie scene. Doesn't quite look real. You know, the way the bodies are always laid. It's like, you know, you get to use your senses.
Yeah.
But anyway, and I sat there, thought, it's not going to affect me in my business. You know, our governments are now talking about this thing that might become I was about to say pandemic, as we always do, but a pandemic or an epidemic.
Yeah.
And I thought, it ain't going to affect me in my business. Wow. Once they actually hit the streets with it and said, look, we're having to do lockdowns and whatnot, and they've made out there's a few cases in our country because of people traveling.
Yeah.
Okay. I wasn't completely sure with what was happening because it hit me by surprise like everyone else. But then the customers started phoning me up saying, we need to cancel the job till further notice. And I was like, oh, this is really hitting hard now.
Yeah.
So that's when that happened. Well, for the first couple of weeks, if I did go out the house to see a friend or went to do anything, I'd have to come home, strip off in the porch, run upstairs to the shower, let her put my stuff into the washing machine, you know, my partner and that.
Yeah.
And I had to live like that for a week or two under what's classed as like bloody military panic mode, just in case.
Yeah.
And I weren't having it. And I got to the point
Right.
where I found one day I cracked. She was walking around the house, bleaching the handles every 5 minutes, and I'm like, I am not having this. So I flipped. I
Yeah.
phoned up all my family and my brother, and my friends, saying, "Get yourself around here now. We're being lied to. I'm not having it." And they were like, "No, no, no," you know. And I was like, "No,
Yeah.
get yourself here now. We need to have a discussion." So a few people came round. They wouldn't
Right.
come near each other, and it was all, you know, everyone was unsure. And I was deliberately trying to get people to touch my kids, saying, "Oh, Oscar, give them a hug." They haven't had hugs off everyone, you know.
Yeah.
To say, "Look, I'm crossing that barrier now, which could be dangerous," but I was taking that risk.
Yeah.
And I felt like, no, I'm not having it. So,
Yeah.
okay, that broke the back of that. And then people over the next couple of weeks started to ease into coming around the house back to normal. Because my house was an open house. I'd have people in every day. I could come home from work. I wouldn't know what friends or family are there.
Yeah.
And that's the way it was, my way of life. Well, obviously, then I had to really step into my old conspiracy state where people were like, here he goes again, here he goes. And, you know, he's against the governments, he's against everything, and he's getting fired up. But I knew in my heart that what I was standing for at that point, you know, I felt confident enough to say, I'm not putting my children's lives at risk, even though the media made out like this thing was deadly
Yeah.
and so on. Well, anyway, a couple more weeks after that, you know, I'd even done a test on a live video where I got a couple of people that apparently had this COVID, to spit in a glass, put some water in it and drank it. Then after a
Right.
few days, okay, yes, I had a cold or a flu, got ill. I was panicking in my heart, thinking, okay, what if this is deadly thing and I'm now going to pass it to my kids and whatnot? Okay,
Yeah.
that went through that. But then the flu passed as normal, the COVID flu, if we want to call it at
Yeah.
the time.
Yeah.
So, of course, then being on social media, you see other people that are starting to pop up out the woodwork. I was completely against the idea of the mask things and stuff like that, and doing the odd little videos here and there. Then I got to see other people as well standing up a little bit, and it grew quite quickly after the first few weeks. That's when all of a sudden, boom! I think a lot of us were just like, "Nah, not having it.
Yeah.
Something's not right. We're being lied to. Let's get it all kind of come out of the woodwork and figure it out."
Mm-hmm.
And that's when we did the very first. I did a little gathering protest in Bromsgrove of about 20 people turned up. Then a short while after that was when the Birmingham thing came up, and I spoke to the guys who were going to organise that one, and I said, "I'm going to come along. I have this like group that I'd built called Controversial Subjects Unleashed, which
Yeah.
was starting, you know, about all topics: UFOs, paranormal, twin towers, moon landings, anything and everything that was about." But I thought, you know what, I'm going to bring this COVID thing into it.
Yeah.
I'm going to go and record a few bits at the gathering, see what experts are turning up to do a speech. And that's when I bumped into you there that day.
All right.
And
Yeah.
I did an amazing video that day, which, you know,
Yeah.
went to I think it went into 50 odd thousand people viewed that video in the space of, you know, let us say a few weeks. Then the big London one came up, and then like 50,000 people turned up for that in London. And that's when I was like, you know what? This is amazing now, because people are awakening, they're seeing through the lies, and it's the time for us to, you know, really stand in our truth now and start to grow, unite, and, you know, see that we are going to bring out this truth that was being kept from us at that time.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like how the beginning for 2020 happened for me, you know. So
Yeah. Yeah. It was actually interesting actually when I seen you after that, you know, the protest that you was on, because you really accelerated right into the thick of all that. You know, especially the protests, and your activism really grew, didn't it, around that time?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Because just going back, I do remember you with your animals. Just to mention that you was doing what you sort of, you had it all set up, didn't you, at home?
yeah, yeah. I was
Had all
doing free
sorts. Yeah.
wildlife. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, like you say, you suffered with your work. Obviously, suffered as well from these
yeah, yeah. So
restrictions being brought in overnight.
everybody from the whole, let's just say, through the whole reign of COVID, there was 3 payments I received from the government. Now,
Right.
not one of them payments covered a month's rent
Yeah.
or housekeep, if you want.
Yeah.
So one of the payments, because at this point I was already established and people knew who I was. I had thousands of people on my YouTube, thousands of people on my controversial subjects, and I had quite a few thousand people on my Facebook.
Yeah.
And what happened was that, if you imagine, how do I explain it really? It kind of got to the point where I knew that I had to become this voice, even though I always had a life of a speech impediment and a list,
Yeah.
and I didn't feel comfortable doing the videos. I just knew that I had a purpose and I had to try and empower people, and get to stand up and whatnot. So, it just kind of like everything for me felt like almost a little bit biblical. Went
Yeah.
from a Noah's Ark sort of stage, doing all this animal rescues and whatnot, which, I really did take deadly serious. Then in
Yeah.
regards to the business, when that was destroyed, my kitchen and bathroom business, the free payments I received throughout the whole of this 2020 was a £666 payment, 666.
Oh
Yeah, I
wow.
don't know how they
Yeah.
established that number.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was actually £666, 69 pence. It's almost all the
Oh,
sixes.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but there was 3 payments in total that was meant to help the self-employed. Didn't help one bit. That's why I
No.
never looked at it asking for anything else. I thought, you know what, it's gone.
Yeah.
And I had money and I had a bit of collateral, if you want, and I was
Yeah.
putting my everything into going out, protesting, video making, and trying
Yeah.
to grow numbers. I was paying for people that couldn't afford
Yeah.
to go,
Yeah.
because it's important to see as many people as could there to
Mm.
get the message out to the rest of the masses to say, look, something's not right. Come stand with us. We need to learn what's happening and discover the truth, because we're not going to get given that truth.
Yeah.
And then, it kind of like, it got to that point where, okay, fair enough, it took its toll on me and my family life, because I kind of got such into a frame of mind where I put them second, and I
Yeah.
would sit there and make things clear that this is World War III. It's a duty. There's millions of children that are suffering around the world and whatnot right now,
Yeah.
and people, and I can't allow that. So I know there was okay, everyone was okay at home, but I
Yeah.
kind of got such into a frame of mind where that was being put first. 24 hours a day, I was there video making, out protesting, doing lives, just non-stop, going out to police stations to go and question police and make it very clear
Yes.
to these people how I have to use my, try not to swear, how the hell are you lot classed as detectives or
Yeah.
investigators, and you stood there with your mask on, and you stood there listening to all this stuff that comes through the news, and you
Mm.
can't see what's happening, and you're
Yeah.
supposed to be trusted as detectives and investigators.
Yes.
Investigate what's happening, find out what's happening, because we're doing it, and it should be you. And
Mm.
that's when I realised that the police forces were just being used, and they wasn't
Yeah.
as clever as what people thought, because they were actually being used against the people. They were
Yeah.
giving out fines if you was in a group of more than 2 or a group of more than 6. So I
Yeah.
was deliberately ringing the police up, saying, "Is it true there's a new legislation act saying that you're not allowed to move groups of more than 6?" "Yes, that's correct." "Well, I've got 12 people in my house right now. You best
Yeah.
send the police." And my house was armed response anyway, so they wouldn't just send them around unless it was a very
Yeah.
serious matter. So they never turned up for that. Then it'd be a case of when they brought it down to groups of 2, same thing. I'd
Right.
ring the police and deliberately have people around my house so they can come. Let's see if they turn up. They never did, but they always turned up because they were watching my house all the time. They would always turn up when no one was there to come and hassle me or harass me. Um, then that thing happened where 2021 came, and at this point we were making serious noise. We were getting out some serious videos to people, and that's when they came around my house and raided my house in front of my kids, sort of thing. And that's when there's still a video of that going around where you hear me basically telling them that they're acting like New Day Nazis and
Yeah.
whatnot. And we don't believe in this COVID thing, and you need to wake up and whatnot. And they took all my controversial clothing, sort of thing, and they took my phones and
Right.
whatnot, and they put me under a public order. So I wasn't allowed to use electrical devices in public for a few months. They never once got to charge me, but they put me under a public order, so I weren't allowed to use any electrical device in public.
Oh wow.
Yep. So that was it.
Without
Just
charge,
silence
without
me.
any
Yeah,
charge.
yeah. In the end, there was
Right.
no charges, and they had to release my stuff. But they shut me up for a few months. They managed to do that. So I had to
Right.
get different devices and do it from home. I weren't technically allowed to carry anything in public. So there was a sign
Wow.
of silencing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when I'd sit in the interviews with some of these detectives, I found out after, shortly after, when I'd demand to speak to certain people that I'd already had previous interviews with, and they'd actually handed in their notes and left because they actually did take in what I was telling them, and I'd made them realise that at some point, you people that are now doing your job or just doing your job, like the Nazis was just doing their job,
just following
the people
orders.
are going to drag you out of your beds and your houses, and they're going to deal with you in the end. So you don't want to be a part of that. So if I was you, look into it now, figure out what's happening, because you want to be on the right side when this flips upside down. Well, some of these people were actually doing that behind the scenes at home, or during their work hours, and they actually really did realise what was happening, and they thought, well, I'm not being a part of that, and they handed this is from the local forces.
Wow.
So I was causing the police a lot of hassle because I weren't stopping, and I was turning up there with elderly people that were awakened and handing in documents to prove crimes against humanity at the the head police stations, if you want.
Yes.
Doing lives there, and things were taken off, but I was on it non-stop, and I knew it was a duty. It was a duty for me to get to the bottom of it. And even now, we're always in catch-up mode. We get to the bottom of the COVID thing, and okay, they've eased up on that, and they'll bring out the next thing, and it's a repetitive cycle of keeping up with these evil monsters that are running the world into the ground right now, in order to birth their new world order, of course.
Yes. Like you say, I mean, it's the climate emergency thing now, isn't it, that they're sort of moving towards? But I get where you're coming from there. So, I mean, you was doing some proper activism.
Yeah, we were prepared to die.
You was off feet on the ground, wasn't it?
I took warriors out of me, lads that were prepared to die. And then there's a video of me where you're watching one of the things in London at Trafalgar Square. You get to watch me drop kick an officer to the ground because they come storming into the crowd. And I don't know, I panicked. When they come running at us, and there's loads of elderly people and children and stuff in pushchairs, I kind of like sprinted and just flying kicked through the air and took these officers. Like, they weren't even police officers. They were wearing them sort of G4S.
Like private company.
Yeah, they look like police officers, but they were the ones that were whacking people on the heads, and they were going, they were really there to just break up the gatherings and to remove the equipment. So, I did a few things that I'd never have normally done. But for my record anyway, I've already got Section 4 assault on a police officer from many, many years ago, which I was facing a minimum of 3 years in prison if I got found guilty for. Because obviously the police officer acted wrong against me back then and started whacking me with a truncheon without due cause. So that was thrown out of court, and that's when I started to really learn more about the law and how these police officers actually work, and they don't always follow their protocol, which is why, if anything, they're more corrupt than the average criminal in a lot of cases.
As if they, like you say, they're following this as if it's the law. Obviously, you've done your research and you understand whether you call it common law or maritime law. I know you was into that, wasn't you? And difference with legislation, statutes, instruments, and all that.
Represent myself all the way through courts. I've been in court 5 times this year. It's 3 times in magistrates, twice in the Crown Court, where I was facing imprisonment. And fair enough, the first time in the Crown Court, the judge looked at me in the eyes and said, for the 2 charges I've got you for, I can give you a horrific sentence right now. Basically, do you want to test me? Or do you want to go and get some representation and see if you get a better result? And I thought, you know what? There's a line, and I ain't going to push this guy today. So I came back with representation, and all due respect, even though I didn't trust, and I never do trust these people to speak for me or to represent me. The guy that did represent me that day was actually a genuine, legit man that stood there and wanted to see the best result for me. And I thought, you know what? It changed my views a little bit that, okay, there are actually decent people within the system. It's just finding them, which is a rare thing.
And I think that's a key area what you mentioned there. I mean, there are people in the system, as corrupt as it is, who can scupper the agenda because they don't want that happening for their children and families, do they, and themselves. So I think you always will get them type of people who are embedded in there somewhere. But I mean, that must caused you a lot of hardship you've gone through. I know that.
Pain,
And was the spiritual stuff before that, or
no? So
that?
religions have always been there, and I can break the back of religions in most
Yeah.
cases. I'll tell you which culture. When I say culture, I have to call them cultures because that's where they
Yeah.
stem from.
Yeah.
I can tell you which religion started when and where it began from, where it stemmed from.
Yeah.
Even like the most recent religion on the planet, really. We're not talking about the satanic religions. We're talking about the general open to the world options, being like Scientology, established in 1950 by L. Ron Hubbard. Actually really classed as an established church or religion in 1952. L. Ron Hubbard made Scientology from his best-selling book. He's still Guinness Book of Record holder today for the most sci-fi sort of books written by one man.
Yeah.
And that's where Scientology stemmed from. So same for like Christianity. We know it stemmed in theory because Christianity is to do with Christ.
Yeah.
Christ, the fictional character 2,000 years ago, if you look at the exact zero in time, we're 2022. So 2022 years ago is basically where Christ was. So what happened before Christ? Well, Christianity was still there, but it wasn't called Christianity. It was Catholicism, if you want, the Roman Empire and whatnot. And the word Catholic itself, or Catholicism, actually means universal. So it was a universal idea they wanted to put on the earth. So what came before that? The exact same things, but people now recognize the word or terminology as paganism, sun worship. Well, people are still, there's billions of people on the planet today that worship the sun, being Jesus, but really they're worshiping a character. They don't recognize that the actual true esoteric understanding and meaning and purpose of the word Jesus represents the sunlight in the sky. This is easily explained through me just quickly ripping through now, because I know I'm jumping on that subject. But for example, everyone who believes in Jesus, who believes in a second coming and whatnot, and that we're talking Judaism, Catholicism, Christianity, Islam, all of these things. Now, bearing in mind, Islam and Judaism are just simple. They are what they are. Christianity has a massive pie chart. Catholicism is one small part of that, but a large part of it. Then you've got the Protestants and all this other stuff, right, that go around it. So it's the only religion that has so many different options in it. And the differences on it, from a Protestant to the Catholic, if you want, would be, did Jesus carry the cross down here or carry it up here? What's the difference? He carried the cross in their eyes. It's pathetic little differences. They had to change it as they went because people questioned stuff throughout the ages. So before Jesus Christ, a man that was born of a miracle birth, that died or was crucified on a cross for 3 days and was resurrected, that died for 3 days and resurrected, if we say, that itself represents the sun being the winter solstice, where the sun is at its lowest for 3 days, which is scientifically proven. And then it rises again to give life to the earth. Plants can grow, fish life, or ponds will start to defreeze, and all these things happen around the earth, which is the beginning. Well, Jesus in the story after that point is when he goes to see John the Baptist, which is the water bringer, the water bearer. In the zodiacs, it's the water bearer or bringer, Aquarius. But in the part of the story when Jesus goes to see John the Baptist is his journey. He goes around a bit further in the journey, and you get to where Jesus goes to see the two fishermen, Simon and Andrew. Well, that's Pisces. Jesus is known as the Lamb of God. Well, that's the next zodiac, which is Aries, the ram or the lamb, if you want. You go a bit further around in the story, Jesus breaks up a battle between two people, which is the twins of Gemini. You go a bit further around in the story, you get to the point of where you've got harvest, which is to do with the zodiac, where it showed the woman holding a loaf of bread. You go a little bit further, you've got the Scorpio, which is where Judas does the kiss of death. The scorpion sting is representative of lips, the kiss of death. The next part of the story is where you got Sagittarius, which is a horse's body and a man's body on top of it, where he holds the bow and arrow in the zodiacs. That's where Jesus was stabbed with the serpentant, whether it's called spear. And then it's back to the same cycle. He dies for 3 days. Well, before Jesus, you've got Mithra from Greece. That's 1,200 years before Jesus. That's 3,200 years ago. Mithra was Greece's version of Jesus, born of a miracle, died for 3 days, had been resurrected. That's the winter solstice again. And then we're talking about the same other things. Jesus had 12 disciples or 12 apostles. Well, hang on a minute. Mithra has 12 Or you go to Egypt and you have Horus. Horus was also born of a
Yeah.
miracle birth of Isis.
Yes.
And then had 12, was a teacher at 12. The 12 represents the 12 zodiacs.
Yeah.
He also died on a cross. He also died for 3 days and was resurrected. Winter solstice.
Yeah.
It's the same thing, but people, you know, so I had to try and break the religion understanding from the exoteric, which is what the world knows about.
Right.
And the esoteric is the mystical truth. So spirituality for me, I've done all my life of religions. And the one thing I've always ignored is spirituality, because I didn't believe in ghosts. I didn't believe in the unseen up until 2020. And I started seeing all these awakened people talking about spirituality. I'm like, I'm going to have to look into this. So I did. And that's when I was like, wow, do you know what? It is true. There is such thing as the unseen. There is such thing as, you know, we've got the 7 visible spectrums of our light that we're able to see through this mechanical brain and the eyes.
Yes.
But there's also the other spectrums of light that we can't see. We can't see sound, even though our ears are able to pick up on it. You can't see the electromagnetic field, but there's 7 of them too.
Yeah.
So everything was about that. Then I understood because I do anthroposophy, I understood the astral planes, the 7 astral planes.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, this is all tying together now.
Yeah.
So spirituality is important because science will also, for anyone who's a science person and believes in science, which is a religion, by the way, science itself tells you that energy cannot die. It can only be transferred or transformed.
Yeah.
So, i.e., if we eat food, whether it's meat, a pea, whatever, that is a form of energy, but in a frozen solid state.
Yeah.
It's the molecules and atoms are vibrating together.
Yeah.
The atoms are the smallest, and they put loads of atoms together, and then you make a molecule. Put those molecules together, you make a structure, whether it's a solid, liquid, or gas.
Yeah.
So these are the visible solid matter things and whatnot, whereas they're all vibration frequencies. They're all frozen particles of light.
Yeah.
So understanding then the actual spectrum that I didn't take in before, we have a spirit, a soul, and a consciousness, a form of energy that's stored within the body. The consciousness resides within the pineal gland in the skull, which is the third eye for those who don't know.
Yeah.
And that sliced in the middle is the eye of Horus or Ra, which is a mirror image in Egypt.
Right.
What this represents is now we've got we've got 4 bodies to make the human body. So you've got the conscious, you've got the etheric body, the auric body, and the physical body.
Right.
The auric body is, in again, esoteric term or anthroposophy, would be like the nervous system. The etheric body would be the glandular system. Your physical body is the physical frozen part of the body, you know. When I say frozen, I mean the atoms are frozen together to make it a form that we can touch.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I started looking at the deeper of these things and understood it. So, okay, yes, this physical body, that my consciousness and soul is what bonds it all together. The spirit and the consciousness all reside in this. Bonds it together. They will escape this temple once this temple's had its time and it dies.
Yeah.
They will then go back into the waiting light, which is known as the 6 elemental gods or the kingdoms. The 7th is the moon, which is known as the Yahweh or the moon conscious sphere cap. So we're not allowed to remember our previous lives and so on.
Yeah.
You can access that through the Akashic records and stuff like that, which is a special sacred knowledge. I've never done that, you know, but I'm aware of these things that people can do. And my body's not cleansed enough to do that, you know, because I do have the odd little drink here on the odd occasion and I smoke, you know, and things like that. I'm not, how do I pull it? I haven't got enough self-discipline to prepare myself for that sort of brain journey that way.
Yeah.
Even for things like astro travel, to step out of my body on purpose, not when you're asleep in that version of astral projection.
Yeah.
I'm on about doing it on purpose, like they do within secret societies. I was going to sign up to what was known as the Golden Dawn a few years ago, which people see as Aleister Crowley, it's all bad. It's not. The Golden Dawn there's one of 3 buildings in this country, top to bottom.
Right.
One's in Wales, one's up by Scotland, one's down by London. And I had to infiltrate that like I did a few other things to find out some information. The very first time if I went to go and get initiated, which I didn't, on the emails, they would come through and I'd read the email. And don't get me wrong, I had to click on to how to get around this. It would delete itself off my thing before had a chance to even go through it
Oh,
properly.
right.
So it had capability of technology to do that.
Oh, wow.
So it's basically it's a
Yeah.
security thing. So you have to be really quick at reading it or try and record it. So the idea was, for the very first initiation, I would have had to have turned up in physical body.
Yeah.
And therefore, after that, once that would have been done, they have a meeting every week, and then you have to turn up once a week, but not in physical body, in astral projection. And then they have a meeting. So I was like, hang on a minute. So they're actually telling me now on this email that the second meeting, I'd be sat at home, I'd be there in astral projection consciousness and actually be able to have a conversation with these people in a meeting. That's when I was like, wow, the hidden secrets of what are on this planet, the capabilities of our brain, are all being kept in secret societies for a reason.
Yeah.
It was given to the wrong people. The average person in society could be dangerous with it and could do quite, different things and whatnot. So I suppose they have their way of keeping it, but then there are other people within them societies that probably do take advantage of it and use it against the world.
Yeah.
Hence, like, you've got the cabal. Most people understand the word cabal.
Yeah.
And you've got two different things. So you've got the Kabbalistic teachings, the Kabbalah.
Yes.
Now, the Kabbalah is very, very important for people to learn if they want to progress past religions and understandings of what they are. They need to turn to the sacred knowledge and magic of Kabbalah. Now, you'll only ever be allowed a very small amount of information from that, because the only hardy travelers that are allowed to go and use these other realms and step into the heavens and the hells and do all these sort of things, are very high up leveled initiated people. But then there are two sides to the cabal. You get the cabal that are the teachers and the keepers of the altered states of universe and the being and humanity of where we're at and where we're heading and where we're being guided through the ages and the cycles. And then you get those who have took advantage of it and they use it to control the state of being, the state of the universe and everything that we're experiencing right now. They're the hijackers of very important information. So I get why they say, or some of them say, that this had to be kept from humanity, because in the wrong hands, it can be used quite badly. But unfortunately, this the Magi's and the magic that was available ended up in the wrong hands anyway. That's why the world is in such a bad state and being, abused, sort of thing. Probably went a little bit off track there from all that. But yeah, spirituality is the one thing, if anyone wants to progress in life of understanding and awareness, religions are allowed to give you 4 of the 7 elements, the elemental kingdom knowledge. So let's imagine in 4 terms, most people think, what are the 4 elements? Terra firma being earth, fire, air, water.
Yeah.
Well, that is the physical, visible sensories.
Yes.
The other 3, known as the tria prima in Latin, which is the 3 prime metals inside us, which I said in my poem in 2020.
Yeah.
There's 3 prime metals inside us that might just set us free. Them 3 in religion would be classed as the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit.
Right.
The triangle, the pyramid.
Yeah.
So the reason why there's a pyramid with an eye in it, being the all-seeing eye, is because those who control the other 3 elemental purposes, or kingdoms, if you want, from that point of view, have kept it from humanity for a reason. So religions on this planet for hundreds of years were given option 1 or 2. They'll either be destroyed there and then, or you can still be a religion and an ideology and a structure, providing you do not teach all of the 7 qualities. So the one that seems very close to it would be Buddhism, because Buddhism teaches you about the 7 chakras, and man reaching enlightenment, which is Godhead or Christ consciousness in the crown chakra. And the pits of hell are the 2 base chakras, which most people on this earth walk around with every day, living on the 2 lower chakras, the lower vibration frequencies.
Yeah.
So the other 3 are kept within secret societies, and then people that run that, they could be the head of a church or of a mosque or whatnot, and they spot the people like me or you would be, the conspiracy theorists or the esoteric researchers that are ready to progress without knowing there's such thing beyond that wall.
Yeah.
And they will pull you out and reel you in.
Right.
And then they tell you, look, by the way, well done. You've reached the top of the understanding that's allowed within that religion or belief system, welcome to meet the other three, which is magical. Now you can step out of your body and be anywhere in the world through astral projection at any given point.
Yeah.
And then you realize that once this body's dead, you'll be jumping into another suit, you know?
Yes, yes.
And this sort of thing becomes real then, where spirituality leads you to then understand that by rights, you're just temporarily borrowing this body, and your consciousness resides in that pineal gland, which controls this body. The soul bonds it all together. The spirit is everlasting, which means my spirit's been in many bodies before.
Yeah.
Apparently, my spirit, the last time was here was during the Viking battles and whatnot.
Right.
I must have chose to come back into World War III, the greatest war the world has ever seen, on purpose, and been like, fuck World War II and forget World War One. I'm going back for number 3, the great one. And so it's very interesting. But spirituality is definitely not a religion. It is an understanding and a way of life. And believe me, there's lots of little doorways within it, depending on how deep you want to go and how long you spent into it. And people that say, by the way, I'm going to throw something in here that a lot of people need to know.
Yeah.
People that are spiritual will say they can astral project.
Right.
Now, there are drugs on this planet like DMT and mushrooms and stuff that will allow people to have an altered state of consciousness. Mm-hmm. Now, I know something that I'm about to say, and people can argue with it. I've always been very careful of how I put this information out. But when people sit there and they tell me that they astral project, they do this, they do that, I just look at them and do this and nod and be like, okay. Because I know that the gatekeepers to astral projection are governed and controlled by the Masonic orders. Now, bearing in mind, there's over 10 million Freemasons on the planet today. Most of them are classed as societal knife and fork Masons, meaning, regardless of their degree, they are part of one pillar or the other pillar, like all the dark, York Rite, Scots Rite, whatever. And they are heads of police stations, heads of hospitals, heads of schools, heads of societal masonry. They run societies. Then you get the hidden, the occult post, which was what I was asked by a very high up mason, asked me to join and tried to reel me in, and offered me that I could skip all of that other shit and go straight into the occultism, which means I would go from 33-degree level up to 90 odd, which is where that sort of field area is where I would have gone into. Because it's nothing to do with running societies. It's nothing to do with that. It's all about the sacred knowledge and the truth about what we are as a being, an experience, a journey. And because I understand so much about the epochs, which is the great ages, and you get 7 epochs to a great age, 7 great ages. The last 7th epoch was known as Atlantis 12,000 years ago.
Right.
And we're now shifting from the 5th to the 6th epoch, which is why we are the secret 5th root race of the planet of the Earth.
Yeah.
And the 6th root race is about to be born. And then there'll be the 7th, which is the 7th is the Atlantean epoch again, which we'll get to in another 2,000 years.
Yeah.
But the idea is that when you look at things in the Bibles, there's lots of metaphors and mysteries that have been hidden within this. So when someone like myself will read it, I will see what it really means. Not perfectly, I'm no expert, but I'm on it. I'm on the right path.
Yeah.
So, for example, when people see the word Genesis, it's the start of the Bible. Well, Genesis, what's it stem from? What does it mean? What's it about? Genesis is a basic explanation about the 7 days of creation, blah, blah, blah. It's actually telling you there's 7 genetics or generations of creation in total. So the 7 days of creation are to do with the 7. We're the 5th root race.
Yeah.
Africans and Indians, Mongolians, the Native Americans, they're all different root races on the Earth, and they came from different eras and ages. So generally, the last root race to have been birthed is known as the white, generally the blue-eyed, green-eyed.
Yeah.
The Aryans from different points of view and whatnot.
Yeah.
And this is where, in the ancient stories around the planet, people will see that the blue-eyed symbol is known as a very symbolic thing for gods. So the master builders of the planet are basically the Atlantean descendants. This is what's hidden from humanity. So if you look at, for example, Islam comes from the Middle East.
Yeah.
Well, what people are born in the Middle East with ginger hair and green eyes? You don't. That ain't the way your skin color is, and that ain't the way your hair color is.
Yeah.
But Muhammad, their prophet, is ginger with green eyes.
Right.
Don't they get the point that there's something not right there? You go before Muhammad, because that's 600 AD, Anno Domini, which in Latin means after death.
Yeah.
So you go before Muhammad, and you got other said prophets. Well, a prophecy is a prophet that sees. It's just a person that is awakened or a capability. But forget Jesus, because that's just a metaphor, a fictional character. Whereas Muhammad, I believe, lived as a real thing.
Yeah.
But he was enlightened. He was a very high educated being on the planet at the time. I'm not saying that people called Jesus didn't live on the planet and walk on the planet, but the metaphors that have been hidden within Bibles and stories, that itself is not about the character people think it is. Hence why it's all hidden in symbolic terms. Jesus died at 33. Well, you've got 33 vertebrae in your spine.
Yeah.
So you've got 7 chakras. If you raise from the bottom chakra, which is the pits of hell, to your Christ consciousness, the reason why it's called Christ consciousness, Christ is a title. Jesus is basically Jesus from Nazareth, if you want. The reason why it's be called Christ is because the idea that when you hit the higher chakra, it's surrounded by Christ oil, which is Christ oil, Christ consciousness.
Yeah.
The oil itself, if you want, or the liquid, is identical in terms of science will prove this and whatnot, that surrounds the pineal gland as to the liquid that comes out of down there when a male, does his thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's to do with sex energies and stuff, and that's where tantric and kundalini and all that come mix into it. But anyway, so before I suppose them sort of stories, I forgot where I was actually heading with the points. I went back onto Bloody Christ then, didn't I? I've got thrown myself off track there, Mark.
That's okay. It's okay.
I can do that sometimes.
Yeah. Well, no, it's interesting because you're breaking a lot of things down. I mean, just flick back where you reminded me a little bit, because I remember watching the very first Zeitgeist when you was explaining some of that. So some of, I mean, I'm no expert in any of this, what you're talking about, so I'm learning as I go, to be honest, with a lot of that, what you spoke about. But it reminded me of, you took me back to that, of actually, like you say, with the sunset and how it is tied in with the stars, in the zodiac and all sorts of areas.
Well, you hit the nail on the head. So Zeitgeist, before I met you, was one of the things that I'd watched many years ago. Zeitgeist, bit of a freaky documentary, but the explanatory in it was beautiful. And I went round to churches and mosques and different things, and this is before I met you and stuff. And I'd ask questions, and I'd act all dumb, like I didn't know nothing, and I wanted to get to the bottom of what they knew, because they're the ones preaching this stuff. And I started to talk to them, and it'd get to the point where if I mentioned Zeitgeist, they'd tell you it's the work of the devil, get out, and they'd call the police and things like that. It was forbidden. Oh yeah, they was aware of it. A lot of them were aware of it, but there wasn't, they did know, and they shut you down because they knew it would ruin their little structure if the masses heard of it. But ultimately, it's all there within Zeitgeist, isn't it? The 3 kings in the story of Jesus and Bethlehem. The 3 kings of Orion's belt during that period of Christmas, or let's just say Christmas, from the 20th of December up till the 25th of December is when the actual Orion's belt will align in the stars, with the North Star being the brightest star, if you want, to a degree. And that's like where the cross is itself classed as Jesus at that point. And they all, the 3 kings of Orion's belt all align up for them few days and whatnot. It's all symbolic for everything in religion. Is symbolic for, the astrological events and things that happen around us. So it's in plain sight, but people just need to be prepared to step away from their doctrine and realize that, yes, okay, most things in our existence and life has been a whole lie. And it doesn't end there. It's not going to get any better if they allow it to keep happening. Once they look at these things and digest it correctly, then they've already set themselves free from a very important bubble that is stopping their expansion. Kind of leaves them in the Ouroboros, which is
Yeah.
basically, some people know what that is. It's basically a snake eating its own tail, or a dragon. Then you get the
Yes.
infinity figure of eight version,
Yeah.
or the infinity figure of eight version is the equivalent of a spiritual person or enlightened that
Yeah.
reaches when the physical body dies and gets to choose as a consciousness whether to come straight back in or to go into the other astral planes or the heavens if you want.
Right.
Whereas the average man and woman on this planet is immediately on the Aura Bora cycle, which means, or the karmic cycle wheel.
Yeah.
What that means is because they are not raising their consciousness or awareness and they're always stuck in that bubble,
Yeah.
they are immediately recycled back into the hell realm that we live in, to be a part of this slave system and illusion that we're all kind of playing our parts in without realizing until certain points of your life. So yeah, it's quite a
It's interesting you mentioned that about the hell cycle, because you know, a lot of us we will say these it is hell on earth sometimes. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you mentioned about Christmas or Xmas. I mean, because and the sexual thing. I mean, I don't know whether it's only something I can ask you while you're on here. Actually, it's like the X seems to show up a lot, like the cross or X. And some people, I have heard some people mention that as X marks the spot, as in to do with gender, isn't it, and chromosome and
yeah. There's more than one. People have to understand this. There's more than one understanding or meaning with a lot of symbology. Now, symbology in alchemy is the spoken language of the initiated few.
Yeah.
So when we look at alchemy, we'll see really weird, twisted up drawings that don't make no sense.
Yeah.
You know, and I could give out all day, every day information. So, you know, in regards to what's hidden within it, can be more than one meaning. Right. So the cross itself represents the equinox and the summer and winter solstice.
Got you.
So when you go to churches and cathedrals and you start seeing the saints with the golden halo, a lot of them will have a cross behind them.
Yeah.
Well, what that represents is the north and south point being the up and down bit will represent the sun being at its highest or sun being at its lowest, which is the solstice. Then the equinox is when the sun's at its most equal point of height or lowness throughout the year.
Yeah.
That's what that represents, the cross. Now, the cross being the X is when the satanic sort of people knock the cross over in terms of what Jesus was crucified on a cross, if you want.
Yeah.
In similar terms, when they knock it over and the cross is now, put your signature here, and it's always next to a cross. It's a evil thing that's being done. And it's there in their faces, but they know about that, or not every one of them, because they, you know, they're not all taught these things.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of hidden stuff within it all. So in regards to the X and Y chromosomes, again, this is an argument because people that believe there's such thing as we came from apes need to. I'll just quickly run through this with them.
Yeah.
So there's no such thing that we came from apes. We didn't. Okay, we are a hybrid species on the earth that don't actually fit into the pecking order.
Right.
Most people that I watched that were saying, "Well, humans are at the top." Yeah, we are. We are generally the most evil, you know, controlling sort of things at the top of the pecking order on this earth. We have many things that are going to kill us and eat us. I know things can kill you, insects and whatnot, but we are classed as the top of the chart. But we are a hybrid species. We didn't evolve from no apes, okay? And Darwin never ever said in any book, in the book that people refer to is called Origins of Man. In Origins of Man, even though the terminology he used is like our language, but it's not, he didn't speak English like we do today, because we're speaking more Babel now than what we did back then.
Yeah.
He explained very clearly that we have the same ancestral DNA type as apes.
Oh, right.
So this is now proven in science.
Yeah.
You take the amount of genetic strain we have and you alter one or two chromosomes, and then we would either be birthed as an ape or an ape would be birthed as a human. So they're very similar.
Yeah.
But then also science says that we're very similar to a banana if you change one or two chromosomes on it.
Yeah.
To understand this, they need to understand the patenting of life. You get 7 cells of life to create life on this earth. The number 7 again is very important.
Yeah, I'm going to say a lot of 7s. Yeah.
Yep. And I did a whole rub the once on number 7. It's very important stuff. And we'll definitely do a part 2, and I'll bring up some. I'll actually. This is all top of my head stuff. I'll actually bring out my paperwork and my study work, from over the years, and then we'll go deep into part
Yeah,
two.
yeah,
So
definitely.
the actual understanding of this is now, which is genetic, I don't say manipulation, but to a degree it
Yeah,
can be called that. That if you do start tampering with these things, then yes, you could make a human woman birth an ape
right,
by
right.
messing with the DNA system, if you want structure,
Yeah,
pre-birth, of course,
yeah,
before, it's in the cell state of, point.
yeah,
So fair enough to look at what the origins of man's about. It's saying that he recognized that humans and apes can both have the same amount of fingers on their hands. They both have two arms, they both have two
yeah.
ears, and very similar looking. So we had a very similar ancestral DNA structure.
Right.
Now, the confusion is the world curriculum gives people what's known as the missing link. There's no such thing as the missing link. There are lots of things. So if you go back into an ancient culture, which was so
Yeah.
advanced, known as the Mayans,
The Mayans. Yeah,
people need to study the word Maya and
yeah,
understand what that really is. That is
yeah.
this whole matrix that we're in.
Right.
So hence why their word, the Mayans, it's very important stuff.
Yeah.
They used to worship known as the Cro-Magnon.
Right.
So in anthropology, Cro-Magnon is a pre-human being, if you want, that lived on the
Yeah.
earth, like us, but much bigger. Now,
Like
they
a
were
giant, you
worshipped,
mean? Giant.
yeah, like a
Yeah.
giant.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
almost like these Atlantean
Yeah.
descendants that went around the earth, but they
Yeah.
call it in, anthropology and science and stuff now, it's just called a Cro-Magnon.
Yeah.
But they were worshipped by the Mayans. So the Mayans knew something about them. And the Mayans discuss in their hieroglyphics and stuff. And bearing in mind, during the Spanish Crusades, they went round to the Mayans and destroyed all of their books, burnt them all. All of their history was eradicated on
Right.
purpose. So we can only talk of today what's left,
Yeah.
which was hardly anything.
Yeah.
So they knew this was part of the plan. But the Mayans talked about the creation story of the human species today that we are,
Yeah.
and why this race did this to us and what we are from, which is kind of very similar to the Anunnaki story, which is from Sumerian cuneiform clay tablets. So we are created. There is a being that created us as a human species today, and they did it
Yeah.
for a purpose. We are a slave mining race for this. Call them the gods, call them the creators, whatever you want to call them. But they do exist, and they walk among us today, and they look like us today. So hence why they say, like the Rothschilds, their skulls are a bit more elongated.
Right.
So if you imagine to go back in time with this, it's a brilliant, powerful thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
yeah.
the creation of humans and why we are here and what our purpose was, it's not because we're just thrown upon the earth, have a good time, see how your life goes, and you got one life, live it. None of that. It's a load of hibbery jibbery.
Yeah.
The truth
Yeah.
of what this really is about, people need to understand the few subjects tied together, like the anthroposophy is very important because you understand the epochs and the progression.
Yeah.
We're currently living in at the back end of a dark age known as the I epoch. The I
Right.
is about the individual. We're born in a world where we believe we are this physical body. When it's gone, it's gone.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's because, for example, Plato wrote about the time before the moon. Well, why would he
Right.
write about the time before the moon? The moon's purpose is at the conscious sphere cap. So we don't remember our previous lives, because otherwise we would learn nothing, and there'd be no such thing as the all one conscious progression and learning sort of experience.
Yeah.
So very important information, this, because at the end of the day, to understand that we are not just a physical being that dies and that we are part of this big, humongous program, helps people kind of set you free from a bit more of a tyrannical trap that you're in.
Yes.
You have a lot less fear, and you can be a lot less controlled. And then you realize that what the governments have done, which is the evil tribes of Atlantis that then stemmed off, became Heber, which is Hebrew.
Right.
He is the son of
Right.
Aton.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's all there, clever stuff.
Yeah.
The Atlantean tribes. So what happened was they just wanted to have a slave race that they could control. And there was a bit of an argument. Do we give the slaves a bit of freedom so they don't realize they're slaves? Well, the best slave is one that doesn't know he's a slave.
Yeah.
A happy slave is the best slave, does the best work for you. So the masses of people on the planet are generally what's known as useless eaters, because they might have a business, they might have a structure, they might have a life, and the purpose has been carried out now, which is why revelation is important, because we're at the back end of our purpose.
Yeah.
Now it's time for the next stage.
Yeah.
So the controllers and the initiated people that know this, they're rolling it out and they're seeing out humanity in any way possible without setting off the slaves on a mad one.
Yeah.
Because if we all knew this information, we're all going to go on a hunting spree.
Yeah.
And we could end their program and them forever. And then the meek inherit the earth, if you want, from a different point of view.
Yeah.
They won't allow that. So the illusion is that we're free beings. The illusion is, which to a degree we were allowed to go and do what we want, shop where we want, buy a house, do this, that, and the other. But that was what they had to do in order to keep the slaves happy from rebelling. And the controllers that look like us, they're not. So let's go back to the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers and some of these banking families on the earth and whatnot. They are descendants of a different race.
Right.
They are descendants and not the same bloodline.
Yeah.
And a couple of their naughty families back in the day, which is why the idea of royalty, they keep it within their family, incest, if you want, is a very well-known story when you look into these things.
Yeah, like the bloodline,
That's it, the idea of sacred bloodlines. It's because they keep it within their self, because they don't mix with the creation. That's like in Genesis when, Satan is punished, or Lucifer, if you want, because Lucifer as an angel, God's most powerful son, in the story, becomes Satan when he's a fallen angel on earth.
Right.
But Lucifer is punished through being the serpent in the story, by the way, tampering with Eve and Adam, offering them the forbidden fruit, which is knowledge, and interbreeding with. So basically, Satan or Lucifer slept with Eve in the story.
Yeah.
And then that's where this new race, because you got Cain and you got Abel. Abel is Adam's son.
Yeah. Cain
is Satan's son. So the Canaanites and all that, this hidden stuff on the planet is about the bloodlines.
Yes.
So when people now know that there should be 4 blood types, but there's 5. The 5th is the secret race, isn't it, to a degree, which means we have a mix now called recessive negative.
Yes.
It doesn't mean they're aliens or nothing like that. It just means the blood type flows within people.
Yeah.
And that itself stems from something that is not like the others.
Right.
So
that's
what it's all about. So one of the people's bloodlines then interbred with the humans, and then started, you end up with another bloodline.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what it is. But their schools were different to ours. They have a bit more of an elongated school. Their brains were different, and they were able to do all sorts of magical things, which would seem magical to the average man.
Yeah.
Because our brains can, if we allow it to, because we are capped at about 10 to 15% of its usage.
Yes.
And that's from birth. They do that on purpose. The moment someone's born, shove that into their toe, these injections, and they do it from birth. They shut down the spiritual capability, which again goes back to the 1800 Renaissance and where it all began, the great perversion of spiritual truth and the birth of religions to a degree.
Right. Well, Richard, I mean, it's been fascinating going through a lot of this esoteric and exoteric, realms of this information, and a lot of it I don't, it probably take me a bit of time to really grasp a lot of that, because there's such a you've been doing this research for such a long time, and the way you connected all them dots. I'm sure a lot of the listeners and viewers, they're going to find this fascinating. So as I do. So I mean, should we come back and do a part 2 and possibly a part 3, so we can really explore it and go into it a bit deeper, and I can ask you a few questions about it as well?
Yeah, sorry about that. My daughter's just climbing onto me.
Yeah. That's all right.
100%. We definitely need to come back and do part 2, because there's some real important topics that me and you need to cover with people.
Yeah.
And I'll say we could only squeeze in a certain amount today.
Yeah.
And obviously a couple of distractions there. I do apologise, but we will.
No problem.
We've got some real deep stuff to go into. And like I say, understanding the difference between the esoteric and exoteric.
Yeah.
Esoteric is more what's kept within secret societies. It means mystical teachings.
Right. Okay.
And then the exoteric is basically what's known for the masses. It's just philosophical teachings for the masses.
Okay.
So that's kind of how things work. But you've got to understand both of them so to get the big picture of things.
Yeah.
But some of the topics we do need to cover and go through. I think the viewers and the listeners will really like to kind of grasp some of these things that we're going to cover.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
who knows how many parts we might have to go through, because sometimes I do slip off track.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
I say
fine.
most of the stuff that's stored in my head is stored, but when I start getting out my paperwork and stuff, my studies over the years, then we can really touch some important subjects. And there's one or two subjects that I think are very important starting points for people that may be new to all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
That will help them almost imagine doing a bit of a long jump and missing out all the steps between, which could take years in terms of understanding.
Yeah.
So it's very important we can cover some more. So, definitely a part 2 I look forward to, Mark. And, like I say, anything I have to bear in mind, sometimes I do kind of like veer off track when we're on subjects, but,
Well, that's what this show is about. I don't really like to interrupt people when they're in a flow, and I like to get it from the person and get the information. So, that's not a problem. That's just part of this show. And I like to let people get into a flow rather than keep stopping them and asking them loads of questions. Yeah. And I mean, thanks for sharing some of your background and, your journey to, where you are now. And, also, sharing this sacred knowledge and, you've done a hell of a job with this research. So it'd be good for you to get the paperwork out as well. And we can really explore.
We can start covering it.
Yeah.
But make sure, the viewers and the people that watch this, get some of the questions they may have to cover some of the things. Maybe we do like the deep talks where me and you just go into stuff. And then we could also do the odd show where we're actually covering the questions that people may have asked, or even try and cover both in one sitting, but we'll definitely come back. So get this one out there, and get there and obviously go from that point really and book in number 2, and then start going a bit deeper into some of the things that we do need to get out to people and cover with. So it's been a pleasure.
Excellent. Well, thanks for being on the show anyway, Richard, and we'll do a part 2 and we'll dive deeper and possibly for 3, 4 and 5.
Certainly go as far as we need to go, mate. There's a whole world of information to get through. So
this is Enlightened Times podcast, so
it's definitely enlightening times.
Yeah. So look after yourself, and we'll do it all again.
Thank you very much, Mark. Much love to you, and I'll speak to you soon.
Yeah, keep up the good work.
Cheers, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.